Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Today on the show, T.R.Napper, who is fine with being called Tim, as I was told, and his debut novel is 36 Streets. It's amazing. It takes place in Vietnam, 100 years after the so-called Vietnam War, which actually is also referred to as the Second Indochina War, which I found out in my research. So around 2050-ish, near future type stuff. And in this future, the hero Lin is kind of a martial arts master. She's a Vietnamese orphan adopted by an Australian woman that grew up with her twin in Australia, then was deported to Vietnam, doesn't speak the language, joins a gang in the capital Hanoi, and well, welcome T.R.Napper. Tim, what would you add, Tim, to this super short synopsis? Maybe that there is a war going on still, like an eternal war, that there are immersive video games that are projected into um, the retina. What else? Well, first of all, welcome to the Second Life Book Club.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here. It's not 2050, it's more like about 2090
Oh,
in the novel. I think she says I think they say 150 years in terms of after the what the Vietnamese call the American War.
ah,
Um,
yes.
the what else to
And
say
the
about the
war has
novel?
been going on because there is a war going on right now. So that I think it's mentioned that the war between the Chinese occupiers of Vietnam has been
Mm.
going on for 15, 16 years.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Um, so there's another war there. I mean, broadly, it's so you want a more discussion of the war, or just a broad sort of summary of the novel.
Yeah, sort of the setup and where are we in the story? What would you do as an as the Americans say elevator pitch in addition to what I just said?
Well, I I was just at a huge convention in Sydney called Supernova, and so I was pitching the novel over and over and over when people come up and said, "What's this about?" So I'll give you the Supernova pitch.
Ah, so you're totally like practiced in that because authors hate that. I completely understand because it can be very minimizing. Uh, but yeah, go ahead. What is the
Oh, it is
supernova pitch?
minimizing. So I'll give you the pitch and then I'll add a little bit. So the pitch I gave at Supernova was Cyberpunk, Vietnam, the year 2100. Uh, Gunfights, gangsters, martial arts, a military occupation, mind-bending technologies used for social control, and at the center of it all, a damaged protagonist, Lin Tivu, trying to solve a murder at the heart of a global conspiracy. That was the Supernova pitch.
That's good.
Um, it is. It's cool. I think, as you would know from reading it, I think what I don't touch on in that is the thematic issues of trauma, of the consequences of violence, of colonialism to some extent, and
Hmm.
so um, it's. I kind of I tried to make the book thrilling to read, but I also, in the tradition of good cyberpunk, I also want deeper philosophical issues to be at the heart of it as well.
Hmm. What also struck with me, what you all the things that you mentioned, this is what appeals to me, obviously, alongside the gunfights. What struck me at the very beginning, and I pulled this quote and I read it to my wife, who's American, who is learning German, and we are in Germany right now. Here's a quote from the book about the hero Lin. She had a few strong suits. Language wasn't one of them. Hated the
Mm,
laughter every time she foundered on a tone, self-conscious with new words, she fell back
mm,
into silence. Perfectionist, acutely self-conscious, proud. The unholy trinity when it came to learning a language.
mm.
Um, this deeply resonated with my wife because also her experience in this foreign country where she's now is that of then just basically becoming silent. And Linda, matter of fact, her nickname in your book is the silent one.
Mm. Yeah, no, there were a couple of reasons to do that to her, and one of them is to she because she is an outsider figure, so I wanted her to be, in a way, outside the language and full of self doubt, even though as she actually understands it quite well, but she's so insecure about it. But for me, it was also writing about myself. That's how I am with language, whereas my
Hmm.
partner is a fluent Mandarin speaker. So she's and she just dives in, and I often myself lapse into silence when I'm traveling throughout Southeast Asia because I want to say the words perfectly every single time.
Mm.
Um, but no, it was more about the character and more sort of establishing her outsider status.
But for her character, what is really important is the um, is that the language apparently, and this is interesting, is so wrapped up to her identity and being accepted. The because this is what's happening in Germany with immigrants. In America, not so much, but everything is wrapped up in your ability to speak the language. You're being looked
Mm,
at as someone who is, not working hard enough, or whatever it is, when you don't
mm,
speak the language perfectly. And what's interesting, because in your world in the future, it's like, hey, wait a minute, people have this tech, right? I mean,
mm,
they have simultaneous translating thingies
mm,
built into their brains, basically. So why
mm,
is the identity or feeling of belonging so wrapped up in your ability to speak perfectly? I mean, it totally makes sense. It's that kind of thing where it's all around you, and it's and subconscious at the same time.
mm. Well, that's a good point because there is simultaneous translation. This is why in the novel there's I use some visual cues for the reader. So I use the closed brackets in the text, and so that you always know books are so clumsy, can be so clumsy when it comes to this. They either have
Right.
everyone speaking in perfect English, which just doesn't happen, or they'll say they said in Vietnamese or they said in this other language, but then they have to keep repeating that over and over,
Right.
which I think is clumsy. And but then if you have it with the closed brackets as I used in the text, you can always see when it's Vietnamese, Mandarin, English from the perspective of the person if they need a translation. In terms of your question about, why would you have the importance of identity when you have simultaneous translation? It's very much about being part of the tribe or not.
Hmm.
And I think that even I think, as you would know, Trax, the culture, even if you have simultaneous translation, culture is so deeply embedded in language, and it
Yep.
tells you so much about it. It can tell you so much about your place and give you such important insights as well. So it marks her the way she struggles with it, and the way she, in fact, refuses to speak it a lot of the time, even though she possibly is actually not that bad at Vietnamese. Um, is also partly symbolizes her unwillingness to embrace any of her identities. She doesn't want to be Australian.
I was
She
just gonna
doesn't want
get
to
there
be.
because she's totally
Mm,
torn between. She doesn't want to be Australian. She hates the fact that she was adopted by a white woman from
mm,
Australia who kept her in Australia. She, completely. She says this is not my mother, but then again, she rejects the other language and she feels alienated, although she's accepted in the gang high up. I mean, she's high up in the gang. Sorry, I stepped
mm,
on you there, but that is what the story what it makes what makes this book so compelling to me. These kind of complexities, it just be she's caught between a rock and a hard place. Like, where do I belong? Do I belong in Australia? Do I or that cultural background? She was deported. A very
mm,
very brief section later in the book where we get the trauma of her and her twin, where the authorities are deporting them.
mm,
I mean, they want to take her away from the Australian mother who adopted them because
mm,
because they're not Australian. I mean, this is completely absurd. Yet
mm.
it happens all the time right now in reality, actually, not in the future.
Oh, of course. I mean that. I mean, of course different approaches to science fiction, of course, but one of them is extrapolating from the present. One is looking at the DNA strands, is describing what's happening now, but in a way where we're extrapolating on some of the trends. And that's certainly, I think, given that I set the book concretely in Hanoi in the year around 2090, I spent a lot of time on getting the cultural aspects right, but also getting the extrapolation from the geopolitics and technology, uh, of the present, including policies that we have in Australia at the moment. And so anyone coming to the book, with whether they're Australian, whether they're from Southeast Asia, from wherever, they can read it and they go, "Oh yeah, this rings true. This is a plausible future."
Why is Lynn not? Oh God, I gotta keep an eye on the clock because there's a million questions that I have. Uh, but briefly, why is Lynn's standing in this gang, this high standing? She's trained as this martial arts goddess, and Bao, the head of the gang, is preparing her to be the new number one, basically. That kind
Yep.
of standing, shouldn't that be enough to feel like, hey, wait a minute, I don't care if I really belong here, but I'm calling the shots anyways.
Sorry, I shouldn't let my. I'm looking at comments and I shouldn't be.
Oh,
I just
you can, and you can bring them up, and I'll look at them as well.
no,
Um,
I was but then I multitasked and then I didn't hear your question, so I'm not going to do it again. Sorry, audience.
don't multitask him because I have a question about cognitive offloading, which I also understand is an
Oh
interesting
yeah,
concept. I
yeah.
completely agree with that. We all need to
So
cognitively. Go ahead.
so yeah, we absolutely. So she's sorry, she's second highest in the gang, and then sorry, what was the last part of the question?
The question, what is interesting to me, and it totally makes sense how you put it in the book, that conventional wisdom would tell you, what, wait a minute, you're so high up, like in this hierarchy, and you're calling the shots. Who cares if you feel inadequate about language or culture or whatnot? You can tell other people what to do, right? I mean, this is in a way
Mm,
the promise of like the modern world. Like, you don't have to know shit about stuff if you make it to the top, because then you're the boss.
yeah, yeah, but she doesn't
It's
believe it herself. I
Yep.
mean, she's the character is uh, incredibly intimidating for others. But she's also partly because she was an orphan, because she was abandoned, partly because of the sense that she's never belonged to any tribe. She's also filled with crushing self doubt and self loathing, but she always keeps that hidden.
Mhm.
Sometimes she even denies that to herself, and so she sees herself as nominally high up in the gang. She feels that she's not. It's almost like an imposter syndrome, if you will, that she
Absolutely,
doesn't
and yep,
truly, just that she
yep.
doesn't belong there.
No, I mean, and this was kind of a little bit of a I don't know, softball or trick question, in the sense that I think what you lay out in the book is brilliant, because it's that these self doubts, who are basically trauma, if you will, from your own
Mm,
story, they're not erased by however high you climb on the ladder, right? I mean, that is the takeaway
mm,
that I got, that you
mm,
put in there. You have this hurt, this trauma about your upbringing, about your parents, about whatever it is, and you try to kind of put the lid on these negative feelings by climbing up in the corporate hierarchy, in this case the gang hierarchy, which is the same. And you
mm.
still you just it's there's no way of overcoming that unless you really confront it, and she's not confronting them. Sorry,
No,
Tim,
and
there's
there
a lot
is.
of psychological stuff. I don't have a degree, but people do call me Dr. Axter every once in a while. And what Jordan Peterson can do, I can do in a heartbeat. So go ahead.
um, I mean, this is a very tough question because trauma is absolutely at the core of the novel, and I suppose one of the cyberpunk ideas is that I explored, including in my short stories in Neon Leviathan, which is my short story collection. I explored the idea of what's the best use of a memory wipe technology.
Hmm.
What's something potentially positive? Well, some people theorize, and there's some experiments along these lines, that if you locate the memory that caused PTSD,
Mm.
you can cure them of it, right? But the question becomes, even if that's the best use of a memory wipe, the question becomes, what do you lose in yourself that when you deny or erase maybe one of the most terrible, but maybe the one of the most important things that happened to you.
Mm,
And so I won't give away anything in the book, but that is a question that she confronts. As you will know, Drax, later in the
yeah.
novel, she confronts this in a quite shocking way. But I do think trauma is um, it's about individual trauma, absolutely, and it's about. I think it's important if you have violence to show that there are consequences, including for the person perpetrating the violence, but also it's about collective trauma, and this is why Vietnam is um, such a compelling subject. I mean, as I said in the chat, I lived in Vietnam in the old quarter in Hanoi, where the novel is set for 3 years. I did a PhD on Vietnamese literature, and out of the PhD came this novel. But I'd been working throughout Southeast Asia as an aid worker for a decade before I was a writer, and so I see trauma. I know about trauma through in my profession or my former profession as an aid worker. PTSD is very common, and I thought about trauma a lot in the terms of Vietnam because here's a country that was traumatized by war after war after war. There was the colonization of it was colonized for 1,000 years by China, and then it was recolonized by the French, and then the Japanese, then invaded by the Americans, and so it's trauma is something that um, is inherent to their history, but at the same time, throughout its history, and if you take the period after the Vietnam War as an example, that trauma was always tried to be suppressed. What happens when you suppress collective trauma as
Mm.
well as individual? And that's obviously, as you can imagine, that's an incredibly difficult question to tackle. But I think that's there in the as one of the thematic issues in the novel.
And I just put up a slide here that Shyla prepared. She's not with us today. Shyla prepared this slide about the Vietnam War, but only going back to post World War II, 1945, before the Americans come in, the first war against the French colonists, as you pointed out, Tim, the trauma in Vietnam, or the war in Vietnam, the occupation, it's a revolving door that went on for hundreds of years.
Mm,
And reading the book, I was looking at that and refreshing my memory
mm,
about the consistency. And what Shyla, one of the producers of the program, pointed out to me also, what's interesting is that Vietnam has such an interesting geography. Like it's like this thin line, right? Where it's hard to escape the war. That was one of her points, is like in some other geographical areas, it's maybe easy to kind of go just, I don't know, west and then just hang out there for a little while. But here it's just up and down. I don't know if that makes a huge difference when there's war all over the country, but
it makes it. I don't want to do too deep a dive into it, but it it was the northern part of Vietnam was colonized for 1,000 years by the Chinese.
mhm,
They rebelled and kicked them out, but then the northern part of northern Vietnam extended southwards, and there was a they're called the Cham Empire to the south. So Vietnam, in a way, if you look at the southern part of Vietnam, that was the North Vietnamese spreading down through that area. So, uh, in a sense, it's been internally colonized as well. So, if you think about people in Vietnam, anyway, do say there are very different cultures between the North and South.
mhm,
The way the language is spoken is quite different in the North and South. Saigon as a city is very different from Hanoi as a city, in my opinion, and I think anyone who's been there could probably sees that. Uh, so I think the north south difference is something that's important to remember.
mhm, mhm. You mentioned earlier forgetting, and I put up this little excerpt here because there is a ability to memory wipe in the book. We don't want to spoil much, but
Mm,
um, and there's a lot of really interesting comments here in the chat, and I'll get to that as well. But here's an excerpt from the book about this, when the hero contemplates to basically do a wipe. the act of forgetting is both mechanical and natural, but the final act of forgetting is the most audacious and most necessary. We have we have to choose to do it. We must sleepwalk into an eternal present without a past to guide us, without a dream of future to lead us.
Mm,
So yeah, she's here trying to well contemplate this huge decision, and it. I'm scrolling back here through the comments where folks have said that they have heard about the use of selective memory wiping to treat PTSD, and you go deep into the
mm,
book.
mm.
I mean, at least in my mind, this is something a sign of a good book in my mind, anyways, where the themes really stay with you. I want to remind folks we're here with T.R. Napper on the Second Life Book Club, almost a full house at this strange hour, which is the unusual hour of 10 o'clock Second Life time. Usually we're on at 12 o'clock. I want to welcome everyone. Amazing that you guys made it because of the we have this other established time, and sometimes people miss it because they're not aware of the time change. If you have comments to any of these subjects, please put them in the chat. If I don't pick it up in the conversation, just be persistent. Be like a troll. Just cut and paste it until I pick it up, I guess. And earlier you mentioned the thing in the book that you do where you put it in square brackets. Um,
Mm.
the when people speak when it's indicated that there is a translating device is on, and here's a quote from the book, an excerpt. We here in the Bing Xuan, please uh, help me to correct the
Bin
pronunciation.
Shuen.
Bin Xuan are
Yep.
committed to diverse employment opportunities. We even take Australians, and that's the gang kingpin Bao, who is kind of joking a little bit with Lin again, who was born in Vietnam, but then was raised by an Australian mother.
Mm,
Now, this Bing Xuan gang is an actual gang. It's an actual gang that started. And I looked this up on Wikipedia, and it's
mm.
still around in your book, but it started in the 1920s. And then it was
Yeah.
part of the Viet Cong, like some sort of on
Mm,
the ground executioner style people, conscripted by them, I guess. So talk a little bit about, and people asked about Hanoi too. We're going to get to that, but talk a little bit about taking um, these historical, real entities and putting them into the future.
with Bin Shuen, I mean, it's not it it's not something I did a heap of work on, I must confess, but it seemed apposite because it was this it's a gang that seemed to have split loyalties. That at times they were fighting for the Viet Cong, but at times they they were not, and so
Hmm.
their loyalties are divided. And you kind of I don't want to I can't the reason I did that I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to spoil the novel, but it's uh the idea, I suppose the idea in the book is there's a part of the city that's lawless. This is the old quarter, this is the 36 streets. How do you maintain order when even the Chinese occupiers can't maintain order? Well, they resort to gangsters. um, and so, it's I suppose, um, but again, I don't want to. There's a lot of spoilers in this question, actually. So I'm trying to think
Okay,
the
let's
answer. I
skip it.
don't.
I mean, you're the boss. I don't want people to uh, or guests to be forced to kind of spoil their stuff. But I also know that you're a Philip K. Dick fan, and I recently watched a documentary on Philip K. Dick, and I think one of the people who was quoted there said Philip K. Dick is about the concept. I mean, it's about the story, but also the concepts. And even if you know everything about what's happening plot wise, you will still want to read that book or that story because the experience of reading it and going into it and being exposed to the themes alongside this crazy plot is totally worthwhile. I think that's a great
Mm.
point. I think this is a backhanded compliment, Tim. I think that applies to your novel as well. So,
Oh,
uh,
you do?
yeah, people go like, "Nah, I'm not gonna read this because you guys spoiled it." No, do it. Now,
Oh, we
you
haven't spoiled anything. We haven't spoiled anything. No, there's lots of twists and turns. And Philip K. Dick, yeah, I mean, he wasn't great at characters and he wasn't great at dialogue, but by God, he could blow your mind with some of his cool ideas and with his absolute hyper paranoia. Uh, and then, but if you go down the rabbit hole of surveillance capitalism and so forth, you feel like Philip K. Dick was onto something.
absolutely. I'm a huge fan. I would actually, this is a whole different show. I would dispute a little bit the the assessment of his ability for characters and language. I have this discussion with a English professor at Santa Clara University some 20 years ago. I actually think his language and his characters are great. So let's talk about
Oh, look, to
Hanoi
be clear, I'm a
as a.
huge fan. I've got everything he's ever written on my shelf, just yeah,
Oh yeah,
at
yeah,
home.
yeah. No, no. This is a super interesting topic, and I know exactly what you mean. Uh,
And actually, now you mention it, I think you do have to differentiate between the books where he was high on speed and he wrote them in 3 weeks, and the books that he wrote over a longer period of time, like for example, The Man in the High Castle. And I think you can there's quite a difference in between uh, those two sets of novels.
I would stipulate that his forgotten tiny little novel, The Cosmic Puppets, is
Mm.
completely insane. And I don't know if he was high when he wrote it, but that's from the mid 50s. Okay, before we get too much on the dick tangent, sorry, now YouTube is gonna flag this video because what I just said. God damn it. You lived in Hanoi, and there's a bunch of comments here. How was Hanoi at a set as a setting? You lived in the old quarter.
Mm.
Please tell us a little bit about Hanoi as a setting and the importance of you actually living there to help you, as a help to construct the
Oh,
story.
it was fundamental. I couldn't have written the novel, I don't believe, if I hadn't been living there. So as I mentioned earlier, my story is that I came to writing a bit later in life. I started. I was my previous career. I was an aid worker. I was living in Hanoi. My partner was a was working as a aid worker in the Mekong region, and I was taking care of our children. And I started writing, which was about 2013. Um, I started writing about 10 years ago, or at the same time, we moved to Hanoi. And so you, it is if you've ever been there, it's an overwhelming city. It's frenetic.
Mhm.
It's got this rich and deep history. You cannot help but be massively influenced uh, by such a city. And I don't like the thing is I don't like massive polluted metropolises as a rule. I hate them, but I loved Hanoi. And so the 36 streets is a reference to the old name for the old quarter. 36 streets for the 36 guilds, the silver guild and the bamboo guild and so on and so forth. Um but so as I said, I started writing and I was doing some short stories, and towards the end of my stay in Hanoi, I'd immersed myself not only in the city but in the film and literature of the country. And when I was writing a novel, I couldn't. I felt like I had no choice creatively. In fact, there wasn't a choice. I started writing a novel and it was set there. Um, but that, but living there for those 3 years, and then after I left, I did a PhD in part on Vietnamese literature.
Mm.
Um, it had an indelible influence on my writing and my thinking, and it's a perfect cyberpunk city.
Okay, I need
because
to interject and then please carry on. But two things I'm just gonna say, please later, don't forget to help us with recommending Vietnamese literature books, links. Maybe there's something because this is something that I want to really explore different literature or contemporary literature or historic literature from another cultural realm. We have a fan of the book club from Malaysia. She sent me 3-page email with books, so I don't mind that. So we need that. And as you're talking, I'm putting up sort of random photos from Hanoi that I found online. So they're all different wide shots of the modern city, close-up shots of crazy busy streets and fire here in the dumpster, and all sorts of things. So please carry on about the importance now of writing. So we were at you doing your PhD and
no,
you're
and I mean
soaking
that.
up the atmosphere. Yeah.
Um, no, and that's it. So why did I? That was it. Just had such a profound influence on me at the start of my writing career, and it's had a continuing influence since. So I left. I was there for 3 years. I left in 2016, and I've been back in Australia since. I was going to go. We were meant to go back to Southeast Asia, but the pandemic stopped that happening. But no, that's all. That was that's the answer. Oh no, I was
Why
that's
is
what.
it a
That's what I was.
cyberpunk city? Why would you
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, good question. Because it's it has the elements of rain and the pollution and to some extent the neon, but it's more than that. It's more than these surface things. It's the dark underbelly. It's the dark history of Vietnam, um, uh, as an occupied city, as a place where trauma, history is sometimes denied, trauma is sometimes suppressed. It's potentially, if you want to think, as I do, about a future where America has collapsed and China is the sole superpower, and I don't think this is a far fetched thought experiment.
Mhm.
Well, this is also a city that is quite close to China and therefore will be uh, heavily under the influence of this great power, as it has in the past. And
Mhm.
I suppose I was influenced because my Vietnamese friends, um, in a sort of a science fictional way or in a thought experiment way, were like, yeah, we what's the future going to be like? What's going to be happen when America keeps declining and America keeps growing in power? What's going to happen to Vietnam? Something that is hugely on the mind of the people there. There was a poll that came out, a Pew poll of that was taken in Vietnam, and they were talking about trust. Which nations do you trust? And it was quite remarkable to see that the trust of the Vietnamese had in America was far greater than the trust they had of China.
Mm.
You'd think because of well, not recent history, but the history of the last, or certainly the last century, that
Yeah.
that would not be true.
Yeah.
There's a long memory in Vietnam. So it's the cyberpunk city. It's got both the surface aesthetic elements of cyberpunk, but it's also got in the underbelly the thematic issues as well.
The thematic issues of two giants fighting over you and you can't win, so you got to sort of make deals to survive, basically. Sheer
Well, yeah,
survival.
you can't win.
Mhm.
I think that for me that's one of the. Sorry, I've managed to get my character looking from behind a wall. Ah, that's better. Now I can see again. Um, Yeah, one of the things about cyberpunk is that it's you often are dealing with a system that is corrupt, that that is so powerful it really cannot be changed. But the spark of hope and the spark of humanity comes in individual rebellion, and I think that the spark of rebellion in Hanoi is something that is also true of
Mhm.
cyberpunk.
Mhm. I'm going to put up a quote here from the book, which pertains to this, what we're talking about. There is a corrupt official who has taken bribes from the gang. And in an exchange with the hero Lin, he says, I don't want us to win this war and I don't want us to lose this war. I just want it to be finished. I'm a corrupt official who cares for nothing, who believes in nothing. Those like me grow in number every day. He's a Chinese official. But there are others who would have us fight this war forever by any means necessary at any cost. So this leads us actually into the next subject, and we're going to do a reading in a sec. But since we're on it, this talks about what we started with is the endless war and the trauma,
Mm,
and you extended in the book again 2000 the 90s is when it's happening. The war is
mm.
still going on. It's just um completely endless. But this this guy is like, okay, I might be on the other side, but I just want it to stop. um
Yeah, yeah. Because and you can't portray um, the Chinese as monolithic in thinking, of course, as well. Um,
mhm,
there's a human cost. This is the continuing theme of the book. Is that there's a human cost there's a cost to your soul of violence, even if you're the perpetrator. There's a
mhm,
cost to be an occupier, and it becomes um, without giving too much away, it becomes something that is dirtier and dirtier. In much the same way as it mirrors the Vietnam War, and which is, as you mentioned right at the very start when you did your introduction, there is a section in the book which actually is a video game that goes back to the Vietnam War.
mhm.
Quite a long section, actually.
That section is
Um,
amazing. It's basically from the point of view of the player in that immersive video game that is
mm,
projected onto your retina and
mm.
throws you back into Vietnam, and you play an American sergeant. It's amazing how he wrote this, and it's just completely different in tone. It's in the game, and yeah, that's awesome. So go ahead.
Thank you. No, no, that's it's reflecting in a way this history repeating itself, but worse. I think there was a review, and it was in some big newspaper, uh, like the Times of London, so one of the big ones in the UK. And the reviewer said something really interesting. I wish I had it in front of me, but he said something like um, that it shows the book shows how trauma might be weaponized for social control.
Oh yeah.
And I thought that was a good way of putting it.
That's here on my run sheet. It says video games as weapons. This is actually what I want to
Yep.
talk about before we go
Yep.
to reading. So you got this incredible realism in the game, in your book, and you're playing as an American soldier. The Vietnamese folks who are addicted to this game called Fat Victory. They're always playing as an American. It's the default of this game, and
Mm,
it is, and again, try not to spoil it, but it is being used to the video game medium here is used to propagandize and to use it as a tool for social control. Now, we here in Second Life, we like to believe that imagining worlds and having a digital body can be very healing from trauma, but you show us that it goes both ways. Basically, again, is what we're talking about earlier. Cyberpunk, you have technology, and technology is agnostic. It could be used either way.
mm.
But what do you think, also from your sort of personal point of view, about the prevalence of video games? I mean, I think I work in this field. I do documentaries on this stuff, and the last 2 years in the pandemic, I mean, it's also being a father. I'm concerned about the stuff that other parents are concerned too. I just don't see it that black and white. But talk a little bit about like using digital worlds and games as weapons.
It's not. To be honest, I'm not commenting on video games. I don't have a position that they're somehow corrupting. Uh, but my position is, as you say, technology is agnostic. It can be used for good. It can be used for progress and to enhancing the human condition, and it can be used for precisely the opposite. And in this video game, it's using deeper technologies. I guess this is not a spoiler. It uses deeper technologies that also affect your memory.
Mhm.
And the point of the game is this is a broader point that was fascinating for me living in Vietnam, is that the Americans, of course, in the American war in Vietnam, would dehumanize their opponents. And if you remember any Hollywood film, and you think about how Vietnamese are portrayed in those films, it's like we're clad in black and they're screaming and they're just charging into the gunfire, and it's like they don't value their own lives.
Mhm.
But the fascinating thing was there's a book, I put it in the comments there, called The Sorrow of War. And this is why that book is so important. Like, yeah, someone said like Rambo. Yeah, like Rambo, for example. There's a book called The Sorrow of War, and it was the first book. It was written in the 80s, late 80s or in the 90s. It was the first novel um, that written by a Vietnamese person that showed the trauma that they experienced, because the Vietnamese government at the time of the war also wanted to portray the Vietnamese as these automatons
Mhm.
fighting for the motherland, as as good loyal socialists, without suffering, without feeling any emotion, willingly dying. So both sides of the war were dehumanizing the Vietnamese soldiers.
Mhm.
And the sorrow of war is so important for me as a reader, but also within the novel, because it was the first account of the Vietnam War from the Vietnamese perspective that spoke of trauma, and that spoke of the trauma that the protagonist in that novel experiences from the Vietnam War. So the video game, it's part of psychological. I mean, without giving too much away, it's trying to do that. It's trying to depict the Vietnamese people as something a bit less than human. That
Mhm.
their lives just don't matter quite so much, and the suffering is in the occupiers. The suffering is only felt by the colonizers, and so that game tied in to those broader themes.
Mhm. And it's fascinating, of course. Then I think the audience is kind of understanding now how fascinating it is if that game is played by a Vietnamese person,
Mm,
seeing their own side or seeing their themselves represented in the way you describe. So
mm,
that is quite fascinating and a lot of food for thought in the context of the book. Now, I know you don't want to make a statement on video games broadly. Neither do I. I think it's a very nuanced discussion. However, I want to put a slide up here in the back that came up during my preparing because I had to think of David Cronenberg, the great David Cronenberg, and the movie called Existence. And I saw an
mm,
interview with David Cronenberg about Existence, which is about also immersive video games, essentially. He said something to the effect that uh, when the interviewer asked him a similar question, he said, what we want from games is very dangerous. What we actually want is to have a completely different reality, and we need to be prepared
mm.
for the negative outcomes. And I feel in your novel, you were hinting at it. You're also really kind of exploring that because what stays with us. I mean, it's not an in and out type of situation. It something stays with us. But yeah, that's just
Yeah, yeah, no, 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 it lingers. Of
it
course it does.
lingers. He,
Um,
this is a still from Existence I bought on the board where I forgot the name of this actor. God damn it! I don't watch a
is
lot of
that
movies.
is it?
William A.
Oh,
No,
it's
William
Jude Law,
Dafoe.
I think.
Yeah, yeah, right. But William Dafoe is putting basically with sort of
Mm,
a device. I think he's pulling out the thing that is in his body, or he's putting it in with this device. And similar to what's happening in your book, it's in the body. It lingers. It it changes us. It yeah.
Oh, look, I don't get me wrong. In my stories, I absolutely explore this from time to time, about this immersion, about this reliance, about people who want to live continually in other worlds, and the impact it has on them. It is obviously it's part of this novel, but certainly in my short stories, it's something that I touch on from time to time.
Good that you mentioned that. Camera, please zoom in to the table. Neon Leviathan is here on an ebook reader on the table. Uh, together with the sake and these nice coasters that I made out of the flag of the Viet Minh. I'm very proud of myself that I did that. Also, here is here is a Buddha statue. But yeah, Tim's short story collection. I did not have time to go into it. I regret it. It's on the TBR stack. Neon Leviathan um,
Mm.
has short stories. Do you like short stories better than novels? I mean,
Uh,
to
the,
produce.
uh, the reason I got into short stories is because I started writing a novel, and
Because
then I
usually people
quickly.
start with novels, right? I mean, aren't
Well, I
publishers like,
did.
you got to start with a novel?
I did, but then I realized it was terrible. And it was terrible because my aside from the fact my writing was also terrible, it was terrible because I hadn't built a world. I hadn't built the world that you now see on 36 Streets. This is a different novel that never got published.
Hmm.
And then I realized, oh, I need to understand it. I need to understand this world my characters are moving through. So let's go back. Let's go back to short stories because in short stories you can explore different like vignettes from different parts of the world, and you can therefore build up these layers, accrete layer upon layer in your world building. And so by the time the novel comes around, the world is lived in. So what I want is for you, the reader, you get into my book and it's seamless and you trust me and the world feels real and you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about if I've stuffed up my logic somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, but also the great thing about short stories is that if you have ambition to be a writer, it shortcuts the
Hmm.
process because you're getting rejected quicker, you're getting critiqued all the time. It only takes you 2 3 weeks, a month, maybe. Although admittedly I've taken months and months to write a short story, but the process of improvement is so much faster.
Mm.
And then I grew after all of that. I did read a bit of Philip K. Dick's short stories and some others. I wasn't a huge short story reader, but I grew to love the form of the short story. And so now I'm absolutely still, in addition to novels, I absolutely still write them. They're great to experiment. Um, they're great to try out ideas.
It's a
And
training
sometimes,
ground and a dopamine delivery engine for the writer because you get
mm,
quicker also, I guess,
mm,
the sense of accomplishment when you get something done, right?
mm. Well, although you get it's mainly rejections for a long time, but after 1 or 200 of them, you might well maybe after 100 of them you might get an acceptance.
Um, I put another quote here, and Tim, if I can ask you to stand up and do the reading, I'm gonna attempt to bring up the lectern. Usually we have staff for that, but at this strange hour, all my staff said to me, "How much are you paying me again?" And I said, "Well, you're a volunteer." So here is the lectern with
Just
the
to
book.
let you know, with timing, Drax,
You need to get out.
I can no, I can go to about 4:15, but I have a flight I've got to catch.
Okay, so that's 15 minutes past the next hour. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
We'll finish right on the dot. Now, before you read, I want to read this little excerpt that I pulled on the board behind us. This is
Yep.
pertains to what we were just talking about. And again, I'm sorry if I don't mean to spoil, but I believe that Tim's book is completely worth reading because of the texture that he creates. Even if you know all the plot points, there is no substitute of actually going into the texture. So here's a quote about the war. And again, the video game is Fat Victory. That's the name of the game. In
Mm,
every war, each side shall dehumanize the other. Doing so makes
mm,
everything permissible. Every bombing of a civilian population, every mass grave, every outrage. Fat Victory does this in a way that is audacious. It dehumanizes us to our own people. Uh, Referring to the Vietnamese people. Hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese are addicted to a game that embeds the idea that their own people do not feel and that only the other side suffers. Like you were saying,
mm,
uh, the colonizers are suffering. Our side, the Vietnamese side, is faceless and remorseless. The other, fearful and confused. I mean, really, really powerful, powerful stuff. Now, what are we reading now, Tim? I think we're gonna read a an action sequence. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's the action sequence and there's the sequence in the bar. So you want me to do the action sequence?
Yes, that's excerpt number one, page 85. And I
Yep.
apologize, folks, who are like, Drax promised us action. Well, here it is.
Okay.
Actually, also has a swear word, trigger warning, the F word. Oh
Oh,
my
there's
God.
this book has a lot of swear words.
Oh my God. Yes. Very good.
There's- Um, they were waiting for her when she got home. Lynn hadn't eaten on the way back, sake, bourbon, and beer roiling in her empty stomach, mouth like an ashtray. Nan had bundled her into the taxi. Her regular cab, a message runner for the Bin Shuen, serving as Lynn's driver when required. Nan wanted to stop for noodles, but Lynn grunted, no. She had Ice 7 hidden back in the apartment, which would settle her stomach and put her to sleep. In the narrowness of her drunkenness, she'd become fixated on the gold glowing vial. Lynn staggered down the slick arid alley, Nan shepherding. At the base of the stairs, Lynn stopped, held up a finger, and threw up volubly. Nan rubbed her back. Then up the stairs, leaning on the bar girl, bleary eyed, fumbling keys until she finally got the door open. Caught the scuff of feet and a whispered command a half second too late. Lynn's jaw crunched, her head snapped sideways. Nan screamed, and lights flicked on, blinding. Lynn on the ground with one arm up, trying to ward it away. On retina, a message from our AI blipped. Possible concussion. Laceration inside mouth. Drink a glass of water and take an anti-inflammatory. Have someone drive you to the medical clinic on Trang T for full scans. Shall I send them the details of your injuries in advance? Lynn's combat upgrades were above average, supplied over time from Bao as she rose through the ranks. Adrenaline spur, clotoside injection good for 6 months, hardened bones. The adrenaline spur linked to a Chinese military Type 14 combat system, a superseded model, but still made her faster than just about anyone in the old quarter. Rolling drunk wasn't so good for the reflexes, though. Concussion not great for her speed. She spat blood and half a tooth onto the floor, pushed herself unsteadily to her knees. Nan was straining, twisting against the grasp of a Vietnamese thug in a black singlet. He grinned, a metallic glint coming from his teeth. A second man, also Vietnamese, short dark hair, black t-shirt with a Sing Tao brand logo in white, cigarette dangling from his mouth, rubbing his knuckles. He looked vaguely familiar. Both men wore black baseball caps pulled low, but they didn't draw Lynn's attention. That was held by the third man. White, 6'6", cream-coloured Homburg, pure muscle, arms bare, shining with sweat. Combat vest, black with a spider eye and sheen. Strapped to his back, a dadao, its foot-long handle visible over his shoulder. Intricate swirls of light and dark metallic brown. Around his neck, a thin metal chain connected to a slender silver tube. A Nova grenade, white hot, screaming death, his jewelry. He took off his hat, smooth, his movements clipped, precise, and dropped it on the coffee table. Looked like he had a high grade endoskeleton humming underneath all of that. Shaved head, heavy jaw, the center of his throat, a flat silver circle. For reasons she couldn't figure, he was wearing a voice modulator. His pale blue eyes were concerned, even soft, as he looked down on her. A concerned giant with a sword as tall as Lynn, strapped to his back. Fear coiled in her heart. Her combat system was jacking her up with endorphins and adrenaline, the pain in her jaw ebbing, her vision clearing, but there was a thin, ragged edge to her senses. Her hands shook. The white man said, cut her, slice her, just a little. Cut her, make her scream. They weren't carrying firearms. Beershirt had a knife strapped to his belt. Shiny Teeth had a pulse pistol and a dull metal telescopic baton. Beershirt walked over, knife in hand. Lynn looked at him, slack-jawed, eyes glazed. He grasped her chin, tilted it up, his groin close to her face. He smiled down at her. She hit him in the dick. Half cry, half groan from deep in his throat as he doubled over, cigarette falling from his mouth. Lynn rose simultaneously, knee to his face. His head jerked back and she moved on, the second man pushing Nan away as he fumbled for his baton. She fly kicked. His hand came up, head snapping back, and he staggered against the wall. She bent, 1-2 punched his groin, lifted with her elbow, miscued off his forehead, pain shuddering through her arm. Blood on his face, he yanked the pulse pistol out of his belt. She kicked it aside and straight fingered him in the throat, on target this time. He choked. She scooped his pistol from the floor and whirled to face the huge white man, half staggering as she did so, light-headed, dizzy, adrenaline juicing her empty mouth. The man's hand was wrapped around Nan's throat, one huge hand circling it completely, chin pushed up, Nan's eyes wild with fear. Snap, snap, he said, American accent. Snap, snap goes the neck. You've just started a war with the Bin Shuen, she said between hard breaths. You dumb motherfucker.
And that's T.R.Napper reading from 36 Streets. Also, yeah, powerful, dynamic writing here. Really, really cool. Also, I see what you did there. You gave a little homage to Philip K. Dick by putting that dick word in there. In that, I'm just testing the YouTube algorithm, actually. But no, this is great, and we should have said that her girlfriend, Lynn's girlfriend, Ning, is also here, and then that kind of sort of escalates the backlash of
Mm,
this rival gang, escalates the the gang war, and it's interesting because the gangsters always refer to war. I mean, again, I mean, we've been talking about it since the beginning. Everything is war. Um,
do you want me to
and
stay for a second reading or go back to my chair?
you know what? In the interest of time, since you have to leave earlier, let's do the second reading, and then let's talk a little bit about in closing also about your dragon's work with the autism kids, which
Yeah,
I
I
find
was
awesome. We'll
I
get
was
to that.
thinking about that. We hadn't even touched on it yet. But
Oh, I
okay,
have it.
the
I have
sec-
it all here. I thought we have the full 90 minutes of the show, but I can roll with the punches, Tim, and we're super grateful for you for being here. So the second excerpt is towards the middle
oh,
of the
I
book.
should specify that our I was meant to have as much time. I would have gone for longer, but my flight was cancelled and they forced me to go on an earlier one, so I
Yeah,
didn't have a
yeah.
choice.
No, no, I understand. I really feel that absolutely those workers at these airlines are to blame for that, not the CEOs. It's just unbelievable how the working
That
class is screwing us over. I can't believe it. It's just
this
these
speaking
workers.
of mother Yeah, speaking of motherfuckers, the CEO of Qantas is definitely one. Is that going to hurt your rating on
No,
YouTube
please.
saying that?
No, no, no. I welcome it. And if people didn't detect my sarcasm about the workers, it's actually kind of incredible. Not to go off a tangent here, that somehow these out of touch captains of industry feel that they can publicly make statements against workers and kind of shift the blame on the mess that's happening on low
Mm,
level workers who work for very very bad pay, that they're somehow to blame for everything, including inflation. But I digress. Now, the read number two is about from the middle of the book. It's a wonderful excerpt that you chose here because it's the gang conflict here is heating up, and Lynn goes to this bar and encounters an old timer, the owner of this bar, who reads a poem and who talks a little bit also about this wonderful quote about expats. Yeah, I
exiles,
don't
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that's you. That's like you in that book, that bar owner. I thought like maybe that's you wrote yourself in that character or
Oh, that's
something.
based on actually a Vietnamese friend of mine.
Hmm. Ah, okay. Does he know that?
Um,
Do people, when you put people in books, do they know that?
no, I asked him.
Oh.
He, there's a real. If you ever in
Oh,
Hanoi,
so
there's a
that's
bar
actually the
called.
real guy. He owns that bar.
Not quite real. It's of course it's a it's creative license, but um, there is a real bar called Tadioto in Hanoi, and if you're ever there, you should go because the
Oh.
owners is a Well, you'll see what he's like because he's kind of in this description. But it the service as I describe it in this book is much like the service in Tadiota.
Awesome. Okay,
Okay,
go ahead.
so chapter 35. Lynn pushed her way through the front doors, out of the breathless night air and perpetual arias of the scooter horns, into the cool of Tadioto. Small, local bar, tiny wooden tables jammed together, white shirted staff that always got the orders wrong, best whiskey sours in the 36 streets. They gave Lynn a single table in the back towards the bar, eyeline to the front door. Cigarette smoke, drunken chatter, clinking glasses, all Vietnamese except a table of four Indians laughing and eating olives. Then said to the waiter in Vietnamese, Pho, whiskey sour, beer LaRue, ashtray. He stared blankly, like he may or may not have heard the order, and wandered back to the bar and started chatting with the girl there. Relaxed vibe, clean, smiling faces, courtesy of an understanding with the Bin Shuen. Some deal between Bao and the owner, the details of which even Lin wasn't privy. Speaking of, the laughter and chatting quieted. Lin looked up to see an old man, trimmed grey beard, thick black eyeglasses, white open collar shirt, mustard silk scarf wrapped once around his neck, cigarette stuck to his bottom lip. The owner, Kui. He looked around at the crowd, eyes twinkling, nodded at the nodded at the different groups. Kui had sat with her a few weeks back, shared some good whiskey. He just wanted to talk about the world outside Vietnam, London, his old home, and to press Lynn about Australia. He said to her at one point, eyes glazed with the single malt, There are two kinds of exiles, Lynn. Those who insist on the illusions of the new country, and those who obsess over what was left behind. She'd wanted to say she was neither, but hesitated, unsure of the truth. When the moment passed, then the moment passed, and she just drank his booze instead. Now the old man sat on a tall, pale wood chair near the front windows of the bar, facing his audience. He cleared his throat and spoke in clear, perfect, educated English. Close your eyes, and you'd think it was a British radio host discussing the arts. I have an old poem I would like to recite for you. He smiled, small and knowing. I'm an old man, you see, and thus disposed to believing everything was better in the past, and unwilling to look too closely at the present, lest I be proved wrong. The poem is called Love Tokens. His gaze moved away from the people in the room. He spoke it soft and clear. I'll give you a roll of barbed wire, a vine for this modern epoch, climbing all over our souls. That's our love, take it, don't ask. I'll give you a car bomb exploding on a crowded street, exploding flesh and bones. That's our festival, don't you understand? I'll give you 20 endless years, 20 years, 7,000 nights of artillery, 7,000 nights of artillery lulling you to sleep. Are you sleeping yet, or are you still awake? On a hammock swinging between two smashed poles, white hair and whiskers covering up 15 years, a river stinking of blood drowning the full moon, where no sun could ever hope to rise. I'm still here, sweetie. So many love tokens, metal handcuffs to wear, sacks of sand for pillows, punji sticks to scratch your back, fire hoses to wash your face. How do we know which gift to send each other? And for how long until we get sated? Lastly, I'll give you a tear gas grenade, a tear gland for this modern epoch, a type of tear neither sad nor happy, drenching my face as I wait. The room was stilled, save the smoke idling from many cigarettes. The silence continued for several seconds until one person began clapping and the rest joined in. Not the sort of poem to which you could be too enthusiastic in the aftermath, unseemly. So the applause faded quickly and the silence crept back, each table not quite sure how to restart their conversations or recall what they were talking about. The poet, Kui, smiled softly as he got down from his chair. He nodded to Lynn, mouthing the words, "Good to see you." She nodded back. The old poet left the room slowly and deliberately through the door behind the bar. Lynn had just started her fur, which had been late enough for her to have 2 rounds of sours and LaRue, slurping down the first spoon of the delicious broth when an alert blipped on Retina. Snakehead Tran. That was it. His name, glowing red. No message or other data. He'd been injured badly, his cochlear implant sending an auto distress to any nearby Bin Shuen. Lin looked down at the fur, took a last inhalation of the aroma, sighed, and dropped the ceramic spoon into the spun bamboo bowl. The bar staff didn't even notice as she bolted out the front door.
And that's Tim T.R.Napper reading from 36 Streets, and we have 5 minutes left. Tim, please
We
have
can
a
have a
seat.
bit more. We can maybe have 12.
I come from brutal radio training with the clock ticking, and I'm OCD that way. You just rewired my brain, and there is no alteration possible. Okay, maybe. But anyway, speaking about brains, Shyla, who I mean, people know this. I read the book, I read the work. I hope always to read two books per week, but this was a crazy week, so I only read this one, none of your short stories. And then Shyla and Monkey here in the who was doing the background research, they listen to, if existing, interviews with the author, and they prepare a little bit background about the author and their point of views. And Shyla came up with this term cognitive offloading that you're talking about. Can you very
Hmm.
briefly talk about what that means to you and the importance of this cognitive offloading in the context of the attention economy? That's a theme that's dear to my heart, and I think it's needs to be really hammered into people's brains, as it were. Uh, the danger and the importance of that kind of cognitive sort of
Um,
cleansing, I guess. I don't know.
as briefly as possible, you think of your phone, your smartphone, as exo memory.
Mhm.
It's part of your brain now, or certainly it's part of your memory system. What's cognitive offloading? That's when you don't even try to put into long term memory certain things that you think might not be important. It might be a phone number, it might be a date, it might be basic facts about an issue, or some more complex facts about an issue, because you've got your exo memory or your exo brain, you've got your phone there that you can always look at. So cognitive offloading is a phenomena that's not very well understood, but there are some studies being done on it, which says that the more you depend on exo memory, the worse your own becomes.
Hmm.
So your memory for certain things will be weaker because you never exercise that anymore. If we treat it like a muscle, you never use that muscle. It atrophies. So there's a theory that cognitive offloading is that our memories become our capacity to put things in from working memory, short-term memory into long-term memory is being diminished.
And the interesting thing is, people will recall the initial sales pitch of the tech folks in terms of this type of technology, specifically the phone, is that this kind of offloading is actually super advantageous because now that we don't have to keep this stuff in our heads, our minds will expand and we will be able to kind of grow and
Yeah.
contemplate really deep stuff. Well, guess what? I don't know, 15 some years later after the introduction of the iPhone, I think most people have not gotten lot smarter, and B, the question is also what they use it for. The attention economy is there to harvest whatever they can. So yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they want us to be dependent on these
There was
things.
a recent documentary on German television about this, where the psychiatrist said, and he put out a number of bits that the brain is able to comprehend per minute or whatever it is in bits, I think he said. And then
Mm,
the fire hosing of information that's coming in is, I think, 10 times the amount. And his theory also, I mean, none of this stuff is proven yet, but his theory anyway is that a lot of this sort of, frankly, mass psychosis that we see on many levels is due to this constant overloading of information. I mean, I don't know. It's not a new thought. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Okay, now I'm looking at the time.
Uh,
Tim, yeah, go
well,
ahead.
I'll just say one
Yeah, yeah.
to attention must be paid. If you want to remember something, attention must be paid. And when you pay
Yep.
attention, your brain changes. If anyone in the audience remembers anything of this interview, it means their brain has been subtly changed. But as you say, we're in the attention economy. So if our attention is so divided and so fractured, and we can't pay attention to something for 5 or 10 minutes or whatever we need to um, convert it into long-term memory, then we're not consolidating those memories.
I was a stay-at-home husband and was on all these mommy and me groups with my young son. I was
Mm,
sometimes the only dad. It was really awesome, and I
yeah, same.
remember. So you also have these experience maybe because there was one couple that told me that their 3-year-old son was watching 4 movies back to back the night before, and they were telling me that their son is brilliant because his attention span is so long. He was glued to the TV for 4 movies in a row, and that is an indicator for them, anyways, that the son was brilliant because of his ability to focus. It was very sad to encounter this type of statement. But anyway, just a little anecdote. Tim, you're doing
Mm,
amazing work with Dungeons and Dragons and with kids with autism. Talk a little bit
mm,
about that, the importance of that kind of thing. Dungeons and Dragons, imagining. Again, we're talking about also exercising the muscle um,
mm.
of imagination.
Look, I wish I could talk about this for an hour.
We'll have you
So for,
back. Well, we will. That's so
I'd love to
awesome.
talk about, because there is some. We discussed it briefly. There are some ways to link it to Second Life as well. But for your audience, in addition to writing, I also run Dungeons and Dragons for a local autism centre, and it's funded by. It's in Australia. It's called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. So if you qualify for this scheme, you can get some funding to help you with your whatever your disability may be, and also with autism as well. So there's been I've been advocating for this for a few years now. The benefits of Dungeons and Dragons to people on the spectrum. The benefits in terms of if there's any D&D players in the audience, I see some. There's a couple of comments.
Shadow says
One
I'm
is,
autistic myself, but I'm not a fan of D&D. Maybe you can sell
ah,
D&D to us, to this 2 hours friendly snake here from New South Wales.
um, well, it's been shown, but it's not. So this isn't just an opinion. This is peer-reviewed study has shown that it can help you with cooperation, collaboration, um, empathy, uh, engaging, uh, reading social cues, engaging with others. All these things that some people on the spectrum really struggle with. So, and it's a kind of therapy. And I do that. I have 3 groups that I run for the Autism Center. There's three sessions a week, and we've been doing some studies. We did some evaluations of it, and the it's had a remarkable impact
Mm,
on some of the players. In fact, all of the players. I'm allowed to give you this example because this person has given me permission. Mostly it's young people. Mostly it's teenagers and young adults. However, one of the players is older, in his 50s, I think. He was housebound for 18 years. So he was a
mm,
shut-in. He heard about D&D at the community center. He came to this is 4 years ago. He came to my session. He struggled, panic attacks, couldn't last the 2 hours for quite a while, but then got used to it. Now comes every week. He's been coming for 4 years, and it's changed his life because not only is he leaving the house for D&D, he's leaving for other reasons as well. It's kind of given him his life back. For others, they talk about it being the one thing they look forward to in the week. Others say that it's the only time they've ever made a friend as a teenager or as a young adult. Um, so it's something that is it's incredibly rewarding to do, and it's a great job to have. But it's you can see the benefits of this cool old school geek game doing this radically social thing of meeting face to face, having paper and pencils, uh, and inhabiting a world in our imaginations.
Absolutely, absolutely wonderful, Tim. This is super fascinating, and the way you describe it with the, in Second Life, we feel similar ways, and the stories that I've done it with folks who study this, they would say the same thing. Of course, some people would make the argument we're not here face to face, although I would push back and say, well, we're very much face to face. Matter of fact, we're face to face with a little dragon here, sitting here in sort of a meditative way. We are face to face
Mm.
with a snake. But now we have to wrap it up. Tim, this is absolutely super awesome. You need to catch your flight. Thank you so
I
much
wish
for
I was here
coming.
longer. I've really enjoyed this, Drax, and I want to thank everyone for coming to listen at this different hour. It's probably if you're Australian or in Asia, you probably quite enjoyed the hour.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for those who had to either get up either very early or very late.
Yes, and I will send you an invoice for the people for their PTSD that they had to get up so early to come to the program. No, but we'll have you back, and I want to talk more also about that experience you have from your work. Damon put a very interesting thing earlier here in the chat about when we're talking about sort of the input that the brain is capable of, and this is similar to the documentary I've seen. What Damon says: the human body sends 11 million bits per second to the brain for processing, yet the conscious mind seems to be able to process only 50 bits per second. It appears that
Mm,
a tremendous amount of compression is taking place if 11 million bits are being reduced to less than 50. The psychiatrist in that
mm,
documentary says that the basically this is not similar to what you're saying, but that the external onslaught of constant information on all from the phone, the TV, the ads,
mm.
that is really kind of killing the retention ability because the brain needs to make these choices all the time. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up the program here again. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you, audience. Really awesome to have a full house, a lot of new faces. Awesome that you guys showed up. I'm going to acknowledge all of them real quick. Highlight Lux, the new ones here, the other ones I did. Tiara, and over here, who is over here? Oh, these are all regulars. I don't need to name your names. You know who you are. No, everybody's appreciated. Bixel, Lexi is here. Awesome. Now, the Second Life Book Club is every Wednesday normally at 12 o'clock Second Life time. slbookclub at Draxtor.com is the email. Oh, also want to acknowledge folks on YouTube, especially Kitten Duo, who is supporting the program. Kitten, thank you so much for your continuous support. If you enjoyed this program, please watch the replay, uh, like and subscribe. Consider becoming a member on YouTube. And of course, got to get this book and possibly Tim's short story collection. The show is produced by Isabel Sharon, Shyla the Super Gecko, and myself. Location manager and master builder is Ruby Geek. This set was built by Theanine. You can find his links to the Second Life Marketplace in the corner. Avatars are made by Ruby and Bespoke Caravan. Research by Shyla. And Monkey is with us today. Thank you, Monkey, for getting up early and doing a lot of research and preparation and putting the links into the chat. We have a lot of sponsors, as you know. Just go around the islands and check out and see what you like and click on it and then find out and then whatever, buy their stuff or tell them that you love books. Whatever you need to do to I don't know, increase the supremacy of the book club in this universe.
Okay.
slbookclub at Draxtor.com is the email. Next week we're back to the normal time. The author is Eve Smith with the possibly one of the creepiest avatars that we built for a guest. But she loves it and I love it too, but it's pretty darn creepy. Her book is Off Target. It's about genetic manipulation and all sorts of other things. I don't know if it's cyberpunk, Tim. I'm not an expert. Tim, please pull your sword, and camera,
I
please.
did.
Yeah, pull that sword out real quick so we have that on camera.
Oh, Sorry, I just pressed. I was just. Oh, I ran away. Hi, bye
Oh, he's
everyone.
running.
I'm
This is
leaving.
this is what
This
happens
is.
with these authors. They're like, "Where's the exit? I gotta get out of
I've got
here."
to get out of here. I'm stuck. Ah! That's it. I'm drawing my sword. Tell me the way out, Drax. I demand it. I've got my sword. Oh, there's a giant snake here. Oh my god, it's dangerous. No, I've got. I really. Sorry, I've got to catch my flight,
Okay,
everyone.
go, go, go,
Sorry.
go, Tip. Go, 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 go. Go catch that flight.
See you.
Bye.
Bye, all.
And everybody else, I'll see you next week here, right here on the Second Life Book Club. Have a wonderful day, evening, wherever you are. Bye.